Eto Comic Club from the Discord for August 2025. Silver Surfer 2014, issues 1 to 5, by Michael Allred, Laura Allred, and Dan Slott. Content warning: non-consensual kidnapping and death does occur, though minimal gore. Silver Surfer History, Part 1. The Silver Surfer is a Jack Kirby creation, first appearing in 1966's The Fantastic Four issues 48 through 50, a 3-issue arc called the Galactus Trilogy, as an unplanned addition. The comic's writer-editor Stan Lee and its penciler and co-plotter Jack Kirby had by the mid-1960s developed a collaborative technique known as the Marvel Method. The two would discuss story ideas, Kirby working from a brief synopsis to draw the individual scenes and plot details, with Lee finally adding the dialogue and captions. When Kirby turned in his pencil art for the story, he included a new character he and Lee had not discussed. As Stan Lee recalled in 1995, there in the middle of the story we had so carefully worked out was a nut on some sort of flying surfboard. Kirby explained to Stan that the story's agreed-upon antagonist, a godlike cosmic eater of planets named Galactus, should have some sort of herald, and that he created the surfboard because I'm tired of drawing spaceships. The herald in this case seeks out and scopes potential viable planets for Galactus to consume. Kirby elaborated in other interviews that Kirby was tasked with making sales and coming up with characters that weren't stereotypes, which ruled out the typical gangsters frequented in most other comics. The kids in California were beginning to surf, and Kirby couldn't do an ordinary teenager surfing, so instead drew a surfboard with a man from outer space on it. I'm going to take a moment to point out a couple of the distinguishing unique elements of the Jack Kirby art style because of how evident their influence are on tonight's comics. Firstly, the way Kirby draws figures is a very boxy musculature with super masculine jaw structures for male characters, and you can see how ubiquitous Kirby's drawings of characters is in the 20th century Marvel art, with many of their artists either emulating or influenced by Kirby's drawing style. Additionally, Kirby had a unique way of depicting energy, whether a roiling sea or a blasting laser gun. Kirby developed the technique, later labeled the Kirby Crackle, of drawing dots of different sizes, some overlapping, some individually. But it wasn't the dots themselves that Kirby was after, it was the negative space that, colored dramatically, could indicate pulsing energy. I've included a copy in the center of this slide of one such panel where the Kirby Crackle is put to full effect with red negative space. If you're wondering, this looks similar to a certain polka dot dress in tonight's comic, you're correct. It's an intentional light homage by the creative team to Jack Kirby's art style. You'll also see many examples homaging the Kirby Crackle throughout the book, including in Silver Surfer's cosmic energy blasts. Anyway, back to the 1960s. Taken by the noble features of the new character who turned on his master to help defend Earth, Stan Lee overcame his initial skepticism and began adding characterization, using the Silver Surfer as a mouthpiece for Stan Lee's more prolific and philosophical musings about humanity. Galactus was set to eat the planet Earth, selected by his herald, until Silver Surfer has a chance meeting with Alicia Masters, the blind human daughter of Fantastic Four villain the Puppet Master and sculptor of statues, who would date and later marry and adopt children with the Fantastic Four's Thing, Ben Grimm. We're going to sidestep the whole story arc where Alicia Masters broke up with Ben, dated the Johnny Storm Human Torch, marrying him in Fantastic Four issue 300, only to reveal the entire relationship was a Skrull called Elijah impersonating Alicia. Anyway, Alicia's impassioned speech is on the current slide, talking about how every living being matters, convincing Silver Surfer to turn against his master Galactus and aid the Fantastic Four. Galactus ultimately decides not to eat the planet, but Silver Surfer's treachery comes at a price. Silver Surfer is fired from being Galactus's herald, and a impenetrable barrier is put around Earth, only affecting Silver Surfer, confining him to Earth, keeping the Cosmic Wanderer from surfing amongst the stars. Following the Surfer's debut, Lee and Kirby brought Silver Surfer back as a recurring guest in Fantastic Four stories, his backstory not yet expanded beyond being a herald. Stan Lee fell in love with the prose and philosophy he could write through the character, who differed from the typical style Marvel standard superheroes in being very grounded and relatable. Instead, Surfer was a alien lens. You could view humanity from on high in a detached manner and wax poetical about the positive and negative attributes of humanity, critiquing and analyzing society, catnip to anybody who viewed themselves as a serious writer. For a long time, Stan wanted himself to be the sole writer for any Silver Surfer stories, seeing himself as the voice of the Silver Surfer, despite Kirby being the main contributor to the character's creation, which, as long as Stan Lee keeps collaborating with Kirby, should be fine and won't result in Kirby being understandably upset. Fast forward to the beginning of 1968, Lee launched the solo title The Silver Surfer, Stan as writer, hiring John Buscema as penciler for the first 17 issues of the series, which was critically well received, especially in the intellectual circuit of universities. But economically, sales started dropping throughout the run. The plan to increase sales was to pivot to a savage Silver Surfer, doing away with the gentler soul Silver Surfer had demonstrated up to this point, with Herb Trimpe taking over inks. Kirby was called up by Stan to do a bridging standalone 18th issue with a long hiatus to see how it sold before editorial would commission more issues. You can see a lot of similarities between how Buscema and Kirby draw the book, especially backgrounds. The 18th issue ended up being the final issue due to low sales, so Savage Silver Surfer never came to be, thankfully. During this 1968 solo run, Stan Lee did flesh out Silver Surfer's lore, but it did diverge from Kirby's ideas of the Silver Surfer's backstory. Apparently, Kirby's original conception of the Silver Surfer was a human being from space in that particular form. Silver Surfer, under Stan Lee's creative influence, was written as a scholar called Norrin Radd on the utopian planet Zenn-La in the Deneb system of the Milky Way galaxy, and the lover of Shalla-Bal, the planet's empress. Zenn-La's ancient and significantly advanced civilization had lost the will to strive or explore, leaving Norrin Radd restless and yearning for adventure. It's worth noting that the inhabitants of Zenn-La looked very humanoid in appearance. When the planet-eating Galactus comes to their planet Zenn-La, Norrin Radd volunteers to become Galactus's herald in exchange for sparing Zenn-La. Norrin Radd is imbued with the power cosmic and all-powerful energy and becomes the Silver Surfer, channeling some of the power cosmic into a board for transportation, thus separating him from Shalla-Bal for a long time. Stan Lee retconned that Norrin being given this cosmic energy temporarily suppressed Silver Surfer's memories, forgetting the existence of Zenn-La for a time, retroactively explaining why he doesn't mention his home planet or lover in his earlier appearances, and Galactus's in-universe logic for the mind wipe is that his herald will surely be a more efficient restaurant waiter if he isn't plagued by memories of what he's left behind or any of those pesky morals and ethics he might have learnt in the past. Norrin develops the silver aesthetic once he has been given the power cosmic. As a side note, in a 1999 comic called Earth X, set in a variant alternate universe, Shalla-Bal, the aforementioned Empress, is the one transformed into the Silver Surfer by Franklin Richards, the son of Invisible Woman and Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four, Franklin using his cosmic abilities to willingly turn himself into Galactus to perform population control on celestial beings, as seen in the Eternals movie. This Shalla-Bal was later killed in battle against the Celestials and is eventually joined by Norrin Radd in the afterlife. Silver Surfer History Part 2. Anyway, back to the 70s. Following the cancellation of the Silver Surfer solo book, the Surfer made sporadic appearances as a guest star or antagonist in other books such as Thor and the Fantastic Four. Lee remained partial to the Surfer, even asking other writers not to use him as a general rule, and with Kirby collaborated on a 1978 graphic novel starring the character, in which the cosmic being Ardina, see her held by Silver Surfer on the graphic novel's cover on the current slide, tries to seduce Silver Surfer to work for Galactus once more and abandon Earth, a graphic novel that is both critically acclaimed and marks the final time that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby ever worked together. It provides a handy recap of Silver Surfer's early adventures, and outside of the Slott and Allred run we're covering tonight is probably what I'd point to as the next great standalone Silver Surfer story for those wanting to read a different, iconic story with the character. After a couple arcs of unusual characters teaming up in the Doctor Strange, Incredible Hulk, and Marvel Future one-shot books, The Defenders was commissioned with Steve Englehart writing and Sal Buscema penciling, with Roy Thomas as editor. Despite Lee's continuing edict on usage of the Silver Surfer, in the early 70s, Roy Thomas approved Englehart's pitch to include Silver Surfer in the team story, teaming up with Doctor Strange, the Hulk, and Namor the Submariner, joined soon into the run by Valkyrie and Nighthawk. This lineup, including additional rotating members such as Hellcat, Hawkeye, and Moon Knight, among others, continued for 125 issues before the book was retitled The New Defenders, with Valkyrie being the only remaining team member from the early issues to stay with a whole new lineup. For time, we won't go into the bios of those characters, but feel free to nominate a book featuring any of those characters for a future comic club in the Discord, if curious. A 1982 one-shot by writer-artist John Byrne, with scripting by Stan Lee, cover on the far left of this slide, marked the first solo book for Silver Surfer, with the writing not solely credited to Stan Lee, and this opened the floodgates. Dun, dun, dun. Silver Surfer History Part 3. In 1987, Marvel commissioned a new ongoing Silver Surfer title, initially written by Steve Englehart. Englehart wrote a full issue set on Earth before Marvel agreed to let Englehart remove the long-standing restriction regarding Silver Surfer being imprisoned on Earth. The first issue was shelved and a brand new first issue was written, the original first issue eventually printed in Marvel Fanfare number 51. Stan Lee was obviously unhappy about losing control of writing Silver Surfer's solo adventures, marking the final character he'd had a hand in forming that he'd handed the reins fully over to other writers, as Stan had become more of a figurehead and the public face for Marvel, giving up writing duties in the process. Stan's unhappiness, he has clarified in interviews, bore no criticism of Englehart or the artist Marshall Rogers. In 1988, Stan did get to write Silver Surfer one final time in a two-issue, out-of-continuity miniseries with artist Jean-Henri Gaston Girard under the pseudonym Mobius through Marvel's Epic Comics imprint, later collected under the title Silver Surfer Parable. Englehart's run introduced many villains for Silver Surfer, including encountering multiple Heralds of Galactus, as well as featuring space politics involving Surfer's homeworld, Zenn-La, which was caught in the middle of a renewed Kree-Skrull war, and Mephisto using Shalla-Bal as a play toy to manipulate the Silver Surfer. However, issues regarding Englehart wanting to use his Avengers character Mantis as Silver Surfer's companion, as well as editorial refusing to let him use Thanos or other concepts conceived by Jim Starlin, led Englehart to leave the book with issue 31. Hilariously, after several issues by fill-in writers, Jim Starlin took over as writer with issue 34 and incorporated Thanos, Adam Warlock, and Drax the Destroyer into the series. Drax's original design can be seen on the bottom left comic cover of this slide. Under Jim Starlin and later Ron Mars, the series would receive acclaim and sales boost due to Silver Surfer's involvement with Starlin's Infinity Trilogy, the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, and Infinity Crusade, with George Perez and J.M. DeMatteis also having brief writing stints on the Silver Surfer series as well. The title experienced great initial success, which allowed Marvel to push the character into other media, including a 1990 video game, a 1992 trading card set, and 1998 animated series, now available on Disney+, and spin-off comics. Silver Surfer History Part 4. The 2000s were a dire time for the Silver Surfer. After a short-lived ongoing series in the early 2000s, in 2007, J. Michael Straczynski of Amazing Spider-Man fame wrote the Silver Surfer Requiem miniseries under the Marvel Knights imprint, where Silver Surfer learns he is dying as the silver shell he is encased in is deteriorating. Evidently he lived, as Simon Spurrier did a 4-issue miniseries after that titled Silver Surfer In Thy Name. Silver Surfer popped up in the early 2010s in some Matt Fraction comics, a familiar name for those who listen to Edo's Hawkeye comic casts, and Greg Pak did a 5-issue miniseries for Silver Surfer in 2011. Then in 2014, writer Dan Slott, paired with Michael and Laura Allred, did a 15-issue run of Silver Surfer that ended due to Jonathan Hickman's universe resetting Secret Wars event, then a 2016 run of 14 issues with the same creative team, which would continue and wrap up the story. Dan Slott, the writer, is a massive Whovian, so the influence on his run of a time and space traversing alien with a human companion on this run is very self-evident, but there's additional layers of influence, including Hitchhiker riffs, Star Trek Next Generation riffs, British sci-fi like 2000 AD, and Red Dwarf influences as well. Ultimately, though, Dan Slott was adamant about tricking everybody into reading a romance comic, hidden in Doctor Who and Jack Kirby-inspired art frosting. It's worth noting that the Dan Slott and Allreds story, totaling 29 issues, is completely self-contained with no dangling threads, so if you want to read this entire run, and only this run, never touching another Silver Surfer story, you absolutely can. After this Allred run, there was a 5-issue miniseries by Donny Cates and Tradd Moore called Silver Surfer Black, tied into Coates' Guardians of the Galaxy series. More recently, Silver Surfer has been an integral part of the King in Black storyline, and is currently part of Greg Pak's Death of the Silver Surfer miniseries. It is involved in the current solo ongoing Storm comic series, which is partway through an arc called Thunder War, involving a number of cosmic entities and deities. Dan Slott. The first Marvel Comics Dan Slott, the writer of today's Comic Club, ever read, involved the Silver Surfer. Dan's cousin only collected one superhero comic, Fantastic Four comics, because of the Kirby art, making Dan read the Fantastic Four's Galactus trilogy. Dan's visits to his cousin's house at Passover between the ages of 6 through 8, becoming Dan's first exposure to the world of comics. Other comics Dan got exposed to because of his cousin's tastes were Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos and House of Mystery horror comics. Dan was exposed to reruns of the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon and the Adam West Batman series on TV. One day, a person dressed up as Spider-Man was signing comics as the character at a local convenience store, and being at the right age to believe Spider-Man was real, this was the motivation behind Dan first comics purchased by himself, and turning into a regular purchasing habit. Typically, Spider-Man and Batman books with a preference for their team-up books to be introduced to other characters, with the occasional Marvel 2-in-1 because Slott liked the Ben Grimm thing. Dan's first published work was a comic page in his college newspaper for an original character called the Nuke Surfer who rode the fallout waves of nuclear explosions, even continuing to turn in pages after he graduated so he could continue getting the approximately $50 a page. 6 months out of college, Dan applied for the Marvel internship, but was immediately rejected because they didn't pay money at the time for the internship. The payment was a college credit. 3 months later, Dan applied for the Marvel internship again, this time going to a college professor and got him to agree to sign off that Dan was doing a post-college independent study. Then Dan lied to the Marvel internship recruiters that he was still in college, and Marvel took Dan on board and as an intern made connections in the Marvel office. When it came time for the internship to end, Marvel went, "It's a shame you have to go back to college, because we'd totally give you a paid staff position." Dan responded, "Oh, I've graduated," showing them his real diploma, and Marvel gave him the position. Dan's also clarified in interviews he didn't take an internship position from anybody else. There were a number of other available open slots for internships that summer. At the time, Marvel didn't have a policy that staffers couldn't also write for Marvel books, and staffers would constantly fill in on writing duties, so Dan would constantly pitch ideas to try and get writing credits. Dan Slott's first published work for Marvel in July 1991 was a Mighty Mouse story and an 8-page backup story in New Warriors Annual Number 1 titled To Bounce or Not to Bounce, featuring the New Warriors character Speedball, aka Robbie Baldwin. Speedball, seen on the top left of this slide, is a personal favorite character of mine and was the last major character Steve Ditko co-created for Marvel Comics with Tom DeFalco. The character converts any physical impact to his body into kinetic energy that is visually represented as colorful balls which bounce the character around in a fashion not dissimilar to a bouncy ball. The science experiment that affected Robbie also affected Niels, a cat that resided in the laboratory, who he eventually adopted and gave the code name Hairball. In the early 90s, Marvel obtained the right to publish comics about a number of Nickelodeon IP, including an upcoming show called The Ren and Stimpy Show. Dan, who tended to go to animation festivals, had seen the original short that would become the original pilot for the show, so had an upper hand on understanding who the characters were over any other writers who would have only been working over the rough details in the packet Nickelodeon sent over, so was the only person who pitched for that duo. Originally intended to be a Nickelodeon anthology book about a number of Nick properties, including Doug and Rugrats, as the popularity of Ren and Stimpy soared, Marvel decided to pivot to an all Ren and Stimpy book, and before any other writer could pitch, Dan already had 2 issues in the drawer, and by the 3rd or 4th issue, instead of it being an anthology book with many different writers as originally intended, Dan Slott asked Fabian Nicieza if Dan could have the book, and the second Dan got the go-ahead he could have the book, he gave his 2 weeks notice at his staffing job at Marvel to be a full-time freelance writer, doing a total of 17 issues of Ren and Stimpy between 1992 and 1995, including issue 6 being the first time Dan Slott wrote Spider-Man in a crossover adventure. Dan did a lot of other IP children's comics, including Scooby-Doo, Looney Tunes, Dexter's Lab, and Powerpuff Girls in the 90s, but started being typecast and struggled to get taken seriously, doing more serious superhero comics that weren't intrinsically funny. Dan saw a way to break into more serious superhero comics through the adventure line of Batman Adventures and Justice League Adventures connected to the animated show's universes, which Slott could use to show editors that he could do superhero comics. One editor saw how his Justice League Adventures comics were good enough that if done in traditional comic style instead of the Bruce Timm art style, they would sell as normal superhero comics, and asked Dan if he'd like to pitch. Dan pitched 2 ideas, one for an original character that I believe became a Justice League story about the villain Red King, and an idea for a DC anthology series set in the style of Twilight Zone with the DC character Phantom Stranger as narrator. The editor pitched both at a meeting without Dan. The all-new character idea got greenlit, but the people in the room got hung up on the idea of a Phantom Stranger book because the character didn't sell. As the higher-ups picked apart the idea, they replaced Phantom Stranger with Batman, then thought, what if it's set in Arkham Asylum, and it's set in the mind of some crazy inmate, and they're your intro POV? When the editor caught up with Dan after the meeting, the editor said they want to do both, but they'd like you to do the Arkham Asylum book first, to which Dan was internally like, what Arkham Asylum book? Over the weekend, Dan worked up a whole new pitch, knowing if he did this dark, gritty prison book right, he'd never be asked to write Bugs Bunny again. DC got slightly cold feet about giving all the best Batman villains to Dan Slott, a new writer in their eyes, which had been their whole idea in the first place, not Dan's, so he got told after his pitch he could do his Arkham Asylum book if he didn't use any of Batman's established villains, told to make up all new Batman villains like they've always been there. With that assignment in mind, Dan Slott created a bunch of all-new Batman-like villains, a couple of whom have persisted outside of the miniseries, even into external media like Beware the Batman cartoon and Gotham live-action series. Seeing the script for the first issue, the higher-ups liked it and went, okay, you can use known Batman villains now, but Slott had already planned out the 6-issue series titled Arkham Asylum, Living Hell. So then, all the known Bat villains became cameos and background characters, which Dan has retrospectively has ultimately benefited that particular story. With the weight of that miniseries under Dan's belt, he was then able to be considered a serious contender for, and ended up writing the 2004 She-Hulk book that went for 12 issues, then wrote the first 21 issues of the 2005 She-Hulk book. In an excellent interview on the YouTube channel of the Comics Cube with Dewey Tano, Dan Slott mentions, during that process, Dan was on all the message boards, and there was a vocal contingent of fans that didn't care about the courtroom scenes and only wanted She-Hulk in the purple and white costume, punching things and flexing the whole book. And initially, Dan was only giving them that for a quarter of the book, and 3/4 of the book was wacky courtroom shenanigans. In Dan's mind, if you were a fan of the book, all the fun stuff was happening in those courtrooms, like a ghost testifying in a murder court case in the 3rd issue of the 2004 run. He listened to the fans he was talking to and put in more fight scenes and put in a whole arc where she worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. and fights the Abomination and punches Iron Man, and the fans, upon reading it, responded, where did all the courtroom stuff go? So when he wrote the Silver Surfer book a decade later, he vowed to himself that he would not read the online chatter and only execute the vision that Slott and the Allreds had. In interviews from the last couple of years, Dan has mentioned that he wouldn't take on the solo She-Hulk book today, as he's more aware of the disparity that exists regarding how rarely female writers are given permission to write solo books for male characters, which remains the majority of ongoing solo titles, so he wouldn't want to take one of the few opportunities women get to write a mainstream book featuring a solo character. Similarly, for characters of color, he would not be inclined to write a solo Miles Morales or Silk book as a white man until the disparity of writers of color being less likely to be allocated a white character's solo book to write had been rectified. He did, however, enjoy getting to write for those characters in Spider-Verse, and he would jump on getting to work with those characters again in a team setting. Doing She-Hulk helped him get writing duty on 2007's Avengers The Initiative, which then gave him the leverage to do Spider-Man. Spider-Man is Slott's favorite character ever, so when he was given 2004's She-Hulk, he made sure to include everything. Slott thought, if this is my one shot, this is my chance to write Spider-Man. Then in 2005, he pitched and got approved a Through the Decades miniseries called Spider-Man Human Torch, where he got to pit the duo up against all his favorite villains, after which Slott thought, if I never get to work on Spider-Man again, I'm good. His through line on the series was seeing these two characters who were like brothers from their high school era all the way to modern comics at the time, to see their bond grow through both the pranks and the support they gave each other, culminating in the payoff of Spider-Man finally taking his mask off and revealing his secret identity to Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, letting Johnny into Peter Parker's world, to see Mary Jane and Aunt May having Thanksgiving with the Richards family. Then a different creative team, while he was writing that miniseries, had an issue in a different series have an unmasked Peter palling around with a number of other superheroes, including Reed Richards, which, after initially annoying Slott, he decided to incorporate into his story by having Johnny ask who else knew, and Pete admitting Reed knew, and Johnny being annoyed that Reed knew before him. In 2008, following the editorially decided events of One More Day, which erased the Spider-Man and Mary Jane marriage, all Spider books except for the Amazing Spider-Man title were cancelled, and the Amazing title was published 3 times a month with 4 different alternating creative teams under the umbrella subtitle Brand New Day, promising fresh characters, stories, and creative teams. The process of writing 3 issues a month and the coordinating with the other creative teams to sprinkle and foreshadow connective tissues to others' upcoming plotlines proved an exhausting process, way harder than being a single creative team working on a single book that burnt out most of the creative teams over the course of 102 issues over the course of 2-ish years. Dan ended up being there the longest of all the creatives and knew as the Brand New Day initiative wound down, the Amazing title would reduce to publishing twice a month with a satellite book with a different adjective in front of the Spider-Man in the title, which became Avenging Spider-Man. Simplifying Dan's story, Dan didn't see them keeping any of the ground down guys from the Brand New Day era for the next Spider-Man era, but Dan loved Spider-Man and never wanted to stop working on Spider-Man, so pitched hard to be the guy who would get allocated to doing the satellite Avenging Spider-Man book. Halfway through Dan's pitch, Steve Wacker, then editor, stopped Dan and said, "No, I don't want you to do the Avenging Spider-Man book," in that moment crushing Dan Slott's hopes. Seconds stretching into eternity, Steve then elaborated he wanted to offer Dan Slott sole writing duties of the twice-monthly Amazing Spider-Man, but with the caveat he had to give up the Mighty Avengers book he was working on. Dan Slott's self-professed workload is 2.5 books a month. During Amazing Spider-Man, in the lead-up to extra Spider-Man issues, he'd bring in Chris Gage as co-writer, so it was purely a workflow-related decision. Asking for time to think about it, within a couple of hours, Dan Slott agreed, becoming the longest-running regular consecutive writer on the Amazing Spider-Man book across multiple numbering reboots, including a stint where the Amazing Spider-Man book was replaced with the Superior Spider-Man book, while Doc Ock was running around in Peter Parker's body, while Peter Parker died in Doc Ock's failing body. Dan Slott's first Amazing Spider-Man issue was issue 546 in 2008, and his final issue was issue 801 in 2018. Interesting stipulations on Slott's run included most of his run, he could only use Norman Osborn on short-term loans from other creative teams who had the character locked down for use in Thunderbolts, Dark Avengers, and other books. As the writer of Amazing Spider-Man, he also didn't have creative control over the Venom and Carnage symbiotes, which became a big part of why Doc Ock was the biggest villain used in a lot of Slott's stories. After issue 700 went back to print 5 times and Superior Spider-Man sales were higher than Amazing had been for years, any ideas editorial had to switch up the creative team were quashed, and Dan was told, "You can stay on the book as long as you want." Once Dan saw the issue 800 milestone looming in front of him, he knew issue 801 would be the perfect exit point for him, and he managed to convince Marvel Editorial to give him the sole stories featuring Norman Osborn and Carnage during that time, and once those were locked in for his final arc, he had the brain blast to combine the two to become Red Goblin. During Slott's run, he was also responsible for the original Spider-Verse story and some of its sequels. The original idea for Spider-Verse came because Slott worked on a video game called Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, featuring the worlds of 3 different Peter Parkers and the Miguel O'Hara Spider-Man 2099, but the game mechanics meant the characters could only team up in the cutscenes. Slott called up Marvel Editorial and said, "We need to do in the comics what they can't do in the video game, have all the Spider-Mans team up, every Spider-Man ever." Slott was the driving force behind getting Spider-Ham included in the Shattered Dimensions video game for a end-game cutscene. His input on the game is fascinating, as are the difficulties he ran into making the Spider-Verse event that would later on inspire the obvious movies. We sadly don't have time to get into the details, but check out the Comics Cube interview in the Discord's Comic Club thread. It's a great listen, including how Spider-Gwen came about. As previously mentioned last year, my favorite Dan Slott issue is Amazing Spider-Man issue 657, where Johnny Storm, in his obituary, calls Peter Parker a member of the family and asks that he take Johnny's place on the Fantastic Four team. One of the most beautifully written, heartbreaking messages in comic history. In 2005, Slott wrote a short-lived The Thing solo series that only lasted 8 issues and was told only the writer of the main Fantastic Four book could write the actual wedding of Ben Grimm and Alicia Masters. So when Dan Slott was allocated the 2018 Fantastic Four series, first thing on his pitch was to get the duo hitched finally, after returning the characters back from where Jonathan Hickman had left them. One of the final arcs of Slott's Fantastic Four run in 2021, called The Reckoning War, was name-dropped in Slott's 2005 She-Hulk book and intentionally pulls on ideas established in Slott's 2004 She-Hulk book, which established a section of space called the Watcher's race could not see and record the goings-on inside. Additionally, editorial wanted a Kree child and a Skrull child worked into the story so that Reed and Sue would have to take them into their family and raise them, and Slott's contribution was the alteration that they would be made Ben and Alicia's children, so the Richards family wasn't the only part of the Fantastic Four family concept growing. The Grimm family, as a part of that, could also grow. Chip Zdarsky, a well-known comic writer, has in conversation said that while Dan Slott's run on Fantastic Four is good, it's just going to be part of Fantastic Four history in a long lineup of good to great runs. Whereas Dan Slott's run on Silver Surfer with the Allreds, artists of the August 2025 iZombie Comic Club, is an iconic run that is going to stand the test of time as one of the seminal runs for the character, and I am inclined to personally agree regarding Zdarsky's assessment of the Silver Surfer run. After recently concluding a 20-issue Spider-Boy run about Slott's original creation, Bailey Bartholomew Briggs, a preteen human mutate who transforms into a spider hybrid with paralyzing venom and communicates with spiders, Dan Slott has recently started writing the ongoing DC's Superman Unlimited series in 2025. Michael, he/him pronouns, and Laura, she/her pronouns, are a married Mormon couple who illustrate and color comics together for a living. Their work has included the independently owned Madman comics and spin-offs, the early 2000s X-Force and X-Statix comics, and the Excellent 2020 sequel, DC's Bug, The Adventures of Forager, and Vertigo's 2010 through 2012 iZombie comics. In interviews, Michael has said one of his favorite characters is Silver Surfer. He was the most soulful character I had ever read in a comic book. Mike went on to explain how the Silver Surfer was forced to be part of mass murder and felt great remorse that drove a journey to right his wrongs, which Mike relates, not that I've ever been a mass murderer, to his own sense of remorse and existence. As a child, whether surfing or skateboarding, he would pretend he was Silver Surfer. Throughout their Silver Surfer run, Dan Slott and Michael Allred are not credited as writer and artist, they are credited as storytellers in every single issue in every collected trade of the Silver Surfer books. Michael describes the creative process with Dan as such. Early on, we talked about the overall epic arc. Then we'd usually have a lengthy phone conversation, which pretty much amounted to Dan in storytelling mode, where he'd just start talking everything out, even doing voices and sound effects. Then I'd get a relatively tight outline with page breakdowns and a good gist of what was being said between characters. I'd jump on it and draw everything out, encouraged to play with it to my heart's content. Then Dan would take what I did and do a final script. Michael also had the luck of being the cover artist for the Batman 66 comic book, continuing the adventures of the 60s Adam West Batman live-action TV series at the same time he was doing Marvel's FF series, and would go on to do the Batman 66 meets the Legion of Superheroes series and other Batman 66 crossovers, including Green Hornet, Man from U.N.C.L.E., the British spy series The Avengers, and Wonder Woman 77. One of his earliest memories was him and his brother Lee running around in Batman costumes, yelling the iconic TV theme song. The first time Michael saw Adam West was at San Diego Comic-Con, but Michael didn't meet him in person, not wanting to risk a less than perfect encounter, so he sent Laura to get his autograph. She told Michael how nice Adam West was, and that was good enough for him. Years later, Michael had done a cover with Adam West's Batman doing the Batusi dance. It was used for solicitations, but the actual comic was replaced with Wonder Girl doing the same pose, since DC had yet to secure Adam's likeness rights, but it had been seen and blown up online. Soon after, Michael saw Adam West alone at a Comic-Con in New York City, and Michael mustered up the courage to approach him. Michael introduced himself as the person who did the notorious Batusi art, and they had a long conversation on a number of subjects. Adam West even walked Michael over to Julie Newmar, one of the three Catwomans in Adam West's Batman series. He and Laura also met Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees band at that convention. Michael also credited his deceased fellow comic creator Darwin Cook as having helped create that whole Batman opportunity. For those who don't recall, Darwin Cook was the artist for the Batman Ego book covered in the Batman Ego Edo comic cast. In Michael's own written words, "You see, way back when he'd stayed with us at our cabin on the Oregon coast, we sat on the floor like little kids, drawing over a coffee table, passing our penciled sketches to each other to ink the other's drawing. One of my drawings I'd done was a portrait of an Adam West Batman. Dar took it and magically inked it up. I loved that drawing so much that I would copy it again and again, duplicating Dar's line work as faithfully as I could when I used it for what became the portrait-style back cover of my DC solo issue, as well as the head for that Batusi cover. I can't not think of Dar whenever I think of all the Batmania that has followed." Laura Allred has won numerous awards for her coloring, including a Eisner Award in 2012 for iZombie and a Harvey Award in 2016 for Silver Surfer. I've also personally loved some of the solo work Laura did on the 2018 Catwoman run. Dan Slott has raved about Laura's colouring in interviews, especially in relation to space, where in Silver Surfer comics, cosmic space is rarely black unless specifically for story purposes. It's frequently portrayed as blue or red or yellow that seeps into the world and ethos of the story. For a more extended bio on Michael or Laura Allred, please check out the recording of the iZombie Comic Club from July 2025. Silver Surfer 2014 Issue 1 Recap. 12 years ago in Anchor Bay, Massachusetts, Reg Greenwood shows a shooting star to his twin daughters, Dawn and Eve, and tells them to make a wish. While Eve wishes to go everywhere there is somewhere to see on Earth, Dawn wishes for the star to stay up in the sky forever and never fall down. Eve calls it a stupid wish, but Dawn's father reassures her, saying that Anchor Bay is the nicest spot on Earth, so there is no need to travel. Unbeknownst to them, the shooting star is actually Galactus's herald, the Silver Surfer, sent by his master to decide whether Earth is a good place to devour or not. The Surfer thinks it is, and resolves to make it all burn. Fast forward to the present day in the Brundlebus Nebula. The Surfer uses his power cosmic to rekindle a small sun and consequently saves the lives of billions of inhabitants of the planet Brundlebus 3. As the populace gives him thanks, two bots come out of nowhere, greet him as their champion, and before he can answer, they teleport him to the Empiricon, one of the greatest wonders in all of time and space, according to the Red Bot. In Anchor Bay, Dawn sticks to her room wall a new photo of the many travels her sister Eve is undertaking. Dawn now works with her father at the Greenwood Inn, a bed and breakfast they opened in their beloved town, while Eve brings tourists in working as a travel agent around the world. The Greenwood Inn is based off a photo of Dan Slott's grandmother's house, a place where Slott's mother's side of the family used to congregate every summer when he was growing up. Additionally, Dan Slott has twin sisters, hence why Dawn is a twin. The bots explain to Silver Surfer why he's never heard of the Empiricon, even though he has seen the whole galaxy and can sense every living thing in his existence. By design, the Empiricon is being kept a secret from Galactus's heralds through unknown powers and the oaths of all its visitors to never tell outsiders about it. Suddenly, the Surfer is attacked by the gatekeepers of the realm, but he subdues them with little effort through his powers. He is then immediately greeted by the alien incredulous Zed. He explains that the gatekeepers hadn't been informed of his arrival, so they had assumed he had bad intentions. He then lowers the shields to reveal an absurd, colorful planet made of buildings, the Empiricon. While Dawn and her father show the tourists around the Greenwood Inn, the incredulous Zed shows the Surfer around the Empiricon, also known as the Impossible Palace, because its structures defy the laws of physics and logic. The blink and you'll miss it moment in here is actually on the Greenwood Inn side of the tour, where Dawn is listing people who have stayed at the Greenwood Inn, and in the panel on screen shows the S mentions Norville Rappaport, a non-famous person. This is actually an Easter egg that gets developed into a full plot point later on. Trillions of spacefaring adventurers have been to the Empiricon, and not one of them has mentioned anything about it to the Silver Surfer. Zed activates the Motivator, a device that sees inside any individual, providing a proper incentive for him to accept the champion's task. In Anchor Bay, Dawn is sitting on her bed, reflecting on her life as opposed to that of her sisters, when she's teleported, along with her whole room, to a cell in the Empiricon. Around her are many other creatures locked in other cells. Meanwhile, Zed tells the Surfer that the Motivator has decided he's the right man for the job, and the Surfer asks for more information about the Motivator. Zed explains that the Empiricon is threatened by a very powerful being, the Queen of Nevers, an original creation for this comic, whom seeks to gain even more power by seizing its energy source. The bots show the Surfer what happened to one of the previous champions, a Battlejack. After he boldly taunted the Queen, he was easily destroyed by her immense powers, and he eventually expired. Zed also adds that the Motivator's actual goal is to find the most important person for the champion and abduct them, to really motivate them to do what it takes to take the Queen down. The Surfer gets really angry about it, ordering Zed to show him who, among his many friends and relatives, the Motivator has chosen. As Zed shows him a freaked out Dawn, the Surfer claims he has no idea who that is. Issue 1, General Thoughts. J'ai thoughts. Jade knew nothing about Silver Surfer, so had no idea what to expect. The panel where our hero exclaims, "What madness is this?" pretty much sums up what was going through Jade's mind as she read. Insect coating the sister's clothing was an interesting choice. Jade was not yet sure if this was anything more than an easy way for the reader to identify them at a glance. The ladybug outfit on a girl with blue-black hair immediately made Jade think of the Miraculous animated series. As a little side note, Miraculous aired a year after the first issue of the Silver Surfer run began. Also, the spot placement was interesting to Jade. Did anyone else think so? The last panel of issue 1 was exactly the right amount of cliffhanger, as Jade was invested from that moment. Joshy's thoughts. I think the opening issue does a lovely job setting up the dual protagonists of this book and the different worlds they inhabit. Ammo's thoughts. Ammo liked this introduction to Silver Surfer. Ammo had never read a Surfer comic before, but Slott quickly gives you the basic of Norrin's tragic backstory, his previous villainy as Herald of Galactus, and how that shaped his current worldview and motivates his heroism. The introduction to Dawn Greenwood is also pretty decent, putting aside the fact that Dawn had apparently worn the same dress for her entire life, and her sister too. Ammo was heartened by how she selflessly shares her wish with the rest of the world, and the reveal that the shooting star is actually the Surfer is a nice inversion of expectations. The contrast of Dawn's very ordinary life with the Surfer's galactic shenanigans also works really well visually, and builds anticipation for those worlds to eventually collide. Silver Surfer 2014, Issue 2 Recap. Silver Surfer is introduced to Dawn Greenwood of Earth. Norrin Radd exasperated that another person from Earth is going to become a pivotal figure in his life. Silver Surfer goes up against the Never Queen, while Dawn uses the dinner trays to stage an escape from her cell, providing Mr. Plorp with vegan zapper apples to trigger his hyperacid reflux, to expel powerful acid that eats through the cell walls. In the creative process, Slott would leave minimal details for any of the alien species, with descriptions as simple as warrior alien race, leaving the Allreds all the creative room to shock and delight him. Silver Surfer destroys Zed and the Empiricon's surveillance cameras to talk privately with the Never Queen, but the Never Queen blasts Silver Surfer, showing him all the possible timelines, including seeing Dawn and Norrin laughing together, falling in love and having a child together, Dawn hating Norrin, Dawn dying in Norrin's arms, as well as other possibilities like becoming a member of the Fantastic Five and other floating parts of his history, including Galactus, Galactus's Herald Firelord, his former team the Defenders, his first love Shalla-Bal, and the villain Dr. Doom, who had attempted to steal the power cosmic from Silver Surfer multiple times in the past. Meanwhile, the incredulous Zed, freaking out over the mass escape from the motivator cells and losing sight of the Never Queen battle, is gifted the fabled edge of reality, able to cut the fabric of existence itself by a mysterious hooded figure to slay the Queen of Nevers. Dawn, leading the escapees to freedom, stumbles upon the Empiricon's reactor core, is revealed to be a heart. Dawn is sort of taken aback by how much she's held herself back by being in one place her entire life when there's so much to see, hear, and do. Dawn amends her original wish while hearing the beating of the Never Queen's heart, cut out and stolen to power the Empiricon, saving Silver Surfer from the Never Queen's wrath. Silver Surfer dismisses the power of wishes as just words, but Never Queen finds it ironic coming from the astronomer from Zenn-La who wished to travel to the stars. The Never Queen explains herself to be the embodiment of all possibility, and the romantic lover of the cosmic entity Eternity, who is a living embodiment of the universe and cosmos, who is immortal, near omnipotent, and equipped with vast, vaguely defined cosmic powers. To see what Eternity looks like, they're on the current slide. They're just above the vomiting Plorp. Eternity, created by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee in 1965's Strange Tales, appeared in the MCU movie Thor: Love and Thunder. Silver Surfer goes to retrieve the Never Queen's heart, sending the board to protect Dawn and drawing his cosmic power deep inside him to fool the Empiricon's senses. Dawn seeing the Surfer's board, comparing it to a magic mirror, tying into the opening scene of the issue of her at a school play as a kid playing the magic mirror. Desilvered, Norrin immediately runs into Dawn Greenwood and is shocked when Dawn says she's going to save Norrin. Issue 2's general thoughts. Joshy's thoughts. My favorite of the aliens that Dawn liberates is Mr. Amygdala, the brain-looking alien, obviously the name a play on the part of the human brain called the amygdala, which has the primary role in processing of memory, decision-making, and emotional responses. Jade's thoughts? Jade enjoyed this issue more than the first. Dawn's sister sounds like a nightmare, to be honest. Jade found it amusing that even in space, vegan options can be difficult to find. Ammo's thoughts. Ammo liked that Dawn doesn't spend this issue freaking out at her circumstances and all the alien life around her, and instead gets straight to work figuring out a plan to break everyone out. Poor Plop having to suffer repeated bouts of hyperacid reflux. Norrin's battle with the Queen of Nevers is also interesting. Ammo was curious to learn if any of those future visions he experiences come to pass. Plenty of interesting material for perhaps a future writer to pick up down the line. Ammo also liked how the seemingly random flashback to Dawn's school play at the start of this issue pays off in her meeting the Surfer's board. Dawn's eventual meeting with Norrin is also very funny. Ammo got a chuckle out of Dawn introducing herself as Norrin's rescuer. Slott had a real talent for invoking common tropes and then immediately inverting audience expectations. Silver Surfer 2014 Issue 3 Recap. At some point, a romantic relationship between the cosmic entity known as Eternity, the embodiment of all time and reality, and the cosmic entity known as the Queen of Nevers, the embodiment of all possibility, created a place where the universe, all of time, and all possibilities were one, and anything could happen, a land of couldn't be, shouldn't be. During one such romantic moment, incredulous Zed used the edge of reality, a sword which could cut through reality itself, to infiltrate the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be, and steal the Never Queen's heart, which he used to power the Empiricon. Nora and Rad, learning that Dawn has freed the hostages and knows where the Never Queen's heart is, calls the prisoners unimportant, but Dawn counters that everyone's important, a dynamic directly homaging Doctor Who, where the Doctor, an alien, often focuses on the bigger picture and needs to be reminded of his inner humanity by an Earthling companion. Battle Lon, seeing Norrin wearing his dead son Battle Jack's armor, attacks Norrin. Dawn helps clear up the misunderstanding, getting Norrin to return Battlejack's armor to Battle Lon. Norrin fills the escapees in that they were brought here as ransom, leveraged so their loved ones and heroes would fight for the Empiricon, and all besides Norrin have perished. Dawn, confused because her father is her hero, wonders if her father was forced to fight and die for her. But Norrin clarifies that he is Dawn's hero because she is an innocent, and he'd fight for any innocent. Battle Lon, wearing his dead son's armor, leads the escapees to freedom, while Norrin and Dawn go to the metaphysical heart, infinitely large and small simultaneously. Surfer fuels the Empiricon long enough for the inhabitants to evacuate, replacing the heart as a power source, the heart turning into a toy monkey with clapping cymbals, so Dawn can comprehend the metaphysical item better. The Never Queen warns Zed if he kills her, every possible branching future will die. There will be no free will, an inescapable destiny where Zed has the Empiricon and lives wealthily ever after, which Zed can live with, but is distracted from killing the Never Queen by Silver Surfer's actions in the Empiricon. The Silver Surfer fights Zed while Dawn restores the Never Queen's heart with the assistance of the aliens she rescued. Zed is stabbed by Silver Surfer with his own blade, allowing the Never Queen's lover Eternity to remove Zed from all of time and space, banishing Zed to Zed's benefactor's realm, the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be. Zed's benefactor offering Zed the opportunity to become their slave so Zed's story can continue. To return the Never Queen's heart, Dawn had to choose her future, but as the Never Queen fades back to where she belongs, she advises Dawn it's up to Dawn whether she chooses to open or close the gateway in front of her. As Silver Surfer and Dawn Greenwood head towards Earth, Eternity and the Never Queen look over the duo and discuss them. There are endless outcomes for these two. Back in the moment where anything could happen, neither rose to their potential, yet they achieved great things. That moment is the before, but now that they're together, every moment is a moment where anything could happen. Issue 3 Thoughts. Jade's thoughts. There were so many moments that Jade loved in this issue that she realized she was just screenshotting most of the comic. Haha! Ammo's thoughts. Ammo liked how Norrin sees how capable Dawn is and actively involves her in his plan to save the Queen of Nevers. This issue is also packed with fun gags. Norrin failing in getting everyone to evacuate until he scares the pants off them. Zed surprisingly, I could live with that line. Dawn called the board to me. Dawn and Norrin's back and forth about the power cosmic, etc. Ammo also enjoyed how Slott continues to play around with the recurring theme of inversions slash twins slash mirrors. For example, Zed calls Norrin a former slave, and then he ends up becoming enslaved himself in a mirror reality after being impaled with his own sword. Silver Surfer 2014 Issue 4 Recap. After Guardians of the Galaxy Border Control Edition, done by the Guardians to verify the Silver Surfer hasn't made contact with Galactus, Silver Surfer drops Dawn Greenwood off at the Greenwood Inn, consumes some seafood bisque, and takes a nap. The humans act pretty nonchalant about an alien in their midst, and are out of the loop with all things superhero related, finding it all repetitive and boring. Meanwhile, mysterious events keep happening on the edge of Norrin's eyeline, like a Cthulhu swallowing a fishing ship, or eating a seafood bisque that forms a demonic hand. Doctor Strange and Hulk sense something is off and make their way towards Surfer's location at the Greenwood Inn. For more info on Doctor Strange, check out the Edo Doctor Strange Comic Cast YouTube recording. I provided extensive history on the character for that one. It remains one of my favorite contributions to the Comic Casts series that Edo did. As for Bruce Banner, aka the Incredible Hulk, keeping it super simple for time, he's a gamma-irradiated scientist with a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde-style sitch, and the Hulk side of his personality has super strength, green skin, and near indestructibility. When Silver Surfer wakes from his nap and takes off to explore the stars solo again, he encounters a barrier similar to the one Galactus once put up to imprison him on Earth. Issue 4 Thoughts? Jed's thoughts? Yet another fun issue. The audience is aware of a mystery that our protagonists are not. Jed takes back her sister is a nightmare comment. Jed very much appreciated yet another cliffhanger ending, but only because she had the next issue ready to go. Coastal thought. Coastal favorably compared the Allreds art style to the pop art style of Roy Lichtenstein. Ammo thought. This issue was mostly just set up for a big battle for the fate of the Earth in issue 5, but it had some nice moments. Ammo liked the brief cameo from the Guardians of the Galaxy, and also the appearances of Hulk and Doctor Strange. Also was very fun seeing the Surfer's board used as an actual surfboard. Surfer's mild freakout over people not knowing who he is was also funny. Ammo also asked why Venom and Carol are part of the team. Agent Venom joined in the 2014 Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Issue 14 by Brian Michael Bendis, with Carol joining soon after, though I believe they mostly alternated storylines and rarely, if ever, appeared together in the run. Silver Surfer 2014 Issue 5 Recap. Everybody except Dawn is stuck in their dreams, and Dawn needs to wake up Nightmare, the Lord of Nightmares, before dawn of the next day, or else everybody on Earth will be stuck in their own nightmares forever. For some context, Nightmare is a 1963 creation by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, first appearing in Strange Tales issue 110, which was the anthology series Doctor Strange used to appear in before getting his own solo comics, starting in 1968. Nightmare is the evil ruler of the dream dimension, where tormented humans are brought during their sleep. Despite his villainy, Nightmare is a necessary part of human existence. Without him to regulate fear through dreaming, humans would slowly be driven insane. Fun fact, Nightmare has a child called Trauma, the product of two humans copulating, the biological father being an avid follower of Nightmare, who pledged his unborn child to Nightmare. Trauma is also sometimes known as Terry. Nightmare has been voiced by Jim Parsons of Big Bang fame in the Superhero Squad show, Greg Sipes, who's also the voice of Beast Boy on the DC side in the Lego Marvel Superheroes game, and by Mark Hamill in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon. Doctor Strange in his astral form lends Dawn the Eye of Agamotto so she can see through the dreams to identify the truth. Silver Surfer and Dawn run through the dreams of others while Hulk and Doctor Strange hold back nightmarish monsters from spilling in. Dawn's sister Eve Greenwood's worst nightmare is to be trapped at the Greenwood Inn forever instead of traveling and seeing the world, destined to become Dawn's pale reflection, living Dawn's life checked out every day the same. Reg Greenwood's nightmare is that time will take away everything he loves and cares about, having taken away Dawn's mum through death, Eve who moved away, and soon Dawn will go too. But even though it's his dream, he never wanted that dream for Dawn. He wanted her to need her own dream and to pursue it. Dawn sees Norrin's past on his home planet through his dreams, finding Nightmare in the non-existent Dream Room Infinity in the Dream Greenwood Inn. They use Silver Surfer's board, mistakenly named Toomey by Dawn, to reflect Dawn's sunlight from another part of the planet into Nightmare's eyes, waking Nightmare up. Nightmare is grateful for the lunar alignment prophecy being broken, as he didn't want to be eternally asleep. Everybody disperses except for Eve, Reg, and Dawn Greenwood, and Silver Surfer. Eve tells Dawn that she can tell Dawn's adventure with Silver Surfer changed her. Reg reinforces that Dawn should have her own dreams for once, but know that whenever Dawn wants, she can always fly back home. Silver Surfer is okay with Dawn joining her in the stars, with the warning that they shall not return this way for some time, and that it will be dangerous. Dawn agrees to travel with the Silver Surfer, and the two take off, heading to anywhere and everywhere. Left behind, even Reg, not able to see the flying duo anymore, sit and watch the sky when the stars come out. Trivia. For some reason, the solicitation summary for this issue describes Shumagorath as the villain, despite the character never appearing in this issue. I have no idea why this is. Issue 5's general thoughts. Joshy's thoughts. Having read a lot of the Defenders comics as a child, it's always a nice nostalgia moment seeing the original lineup even partially reunite. My dad was also a big fan of that Defenders lineup. Jade's thoughts. Jade thought this was a fun and chaotic end to a fun and chaotic arc. Jade thinks this is the issue where Dawn's motivation and growth really solidifies. Ammo thought. The scene where Dawn confronts Eve's worst nightmare is brutal. Ammo didn't really like that it was the Silver Surfer who got to save the day in the end, using his board to reflect the sun into Nightmare's eyes, despite Stranger's prophecy saying it had to be Dawn. At least Dawn got to have agency in other ways in this issue, first by saying no to Norrin when he rudely summons her at the beginning, and then by choosing to travel with him in the end. One little thing that Joshy will counter there is, Strange did specify that it had to be Dawn that saves the day. Dawn can also refer to sunlight, such as the first sunlight of the day that shone onto Nightmare's face, thanks to Surfer's board. Marvel Point 1, Girl on Board. This is just a light beginner story where Dawn and Silver Surfer go to a planet to see a fun celebration, not dissimilar to a conventional Doctor Who episode, and a bunch of aliens, including a cute otter-like species, whisper about how evil the former Herald of Galactus is, and Dawn, not knowing Silver Surfer's horrific past and legacy. Silver Surfer silvers down to fly under the radar, trying to grow hair at one point through sheer will, until pirates, consisting of an orca, a squid, a shark, and a walrus, try robbing the festival with energy weapons that look like old pirate flintlocks. The pirate crew do return in issue 7 of the main series. Dawn then requests to be taken to a new planet as opposed to one Silver Surfer's been to before, comparing it to when a friend shows me their favorite movie. It's great and all, but Dawn would rather see something they hadn't seen before so they could watch it for the first time together. Which leads directly into everybody's thoughts on this story. I'm sorry, but I am the exact opposite of Dawn. Watching something together that nobody has seen before is fine in my book, but it doesn't tell me anything about you or tell you more about me. One of my parents raised me with the belief that there is no greater joy than being able to make a recommendation of a TV show to a friend and be their herald through the experience, able to guide through any of the show's rough patches, help avoid spoilers and specific previously ons or credits, etc. I also don't mind when a friend shows me a story they've seen but I haven't from time to time, because either way, it's a story important enough that a friend or myself is willing to repeat watch it, and the attachment shows the recommender's personality through what they're drawn to, why they're drawn to it, and so forth. Other thoughts, I could also just see all the Doctor Who DNA all over this, so I'm glad that Dan Slott eventually got to do some Doctor Who comic issues. Ammo thought. This little mini-story on the planet Nauticos is fun. Ammo got some serious Doctor Who vibes. The designs of all the different sea creature people are great, and reveal that the Festival of Light is not actually about some kind of aurora display, but instead a bunch of flying manta rays is another great Slott inversion of expectations. General discussion. Part of what Dan Slott wanted to do with the Silver Surfer run was to take the idea that Dawn could go off on these adventures, but there'd be a cost in terms of missed experiences back on Earth. So the twin sister, who was originally the one set on traveling and exploring, would end up being the barometer of missed traditional life milestones each time Dawn returns to Earth, showing how life continues on even when Dawn isn't there, whereas Dawn, initially content to stay in her hometown her entire life, is the one who actually goes on the grandest adventures. Life goes on, things change. Whenever Dan Slott talked to other creators during things like Marvel Summits, one of the things that he would be very strict on was, if you wanted to use the Silver Surfer, you need to use him in space, because every time he comes back to Earth, Dawn's home, that's a milestone that needs to occur inside the Silver Surfer book. Posthumously, after his Silver Surfer run finished and he'd executed his and the Allreds vision, Dan Slott did look at the reviews coming out at the time his Silver Surfer run was being published, and there were a contingent of fans wondering where the Stan Lee-style majestic speeches and soliloquies were, where the Jim-style and cosmic grandeur was. They wanted epic fights, not weird, quirky stuff like Silver Surfer trying the universe's best ice cream. Personally, I appreciate all the different versions and visions, but this Allred run with Dan Slott writing is by far my favorite. Jade Slide. Jade's favorite comic cover? It was a close one between the covers for issues 1 and 2, but the issue 2 with the Never Queen cover wins. Jade's favorite character? The incredulous Zed, but that might be because his name reminds Jade of the DCOM zombie song, Exceptional Zed. Jade's favorite panel? There were so many fun moments. Jade picks this awkward silence after the board gets named. Overall general thoughts? Jade went from having no opinion to having a good time. This was a quick, fairly silly read, but with a few serious moments that help ground the story and get the readers invested in the characters again. Jade rates this 3.5 out of 5 surfboards would click heels together again.
Ammo's overall thoughts. Ammo was very impressed with this comic. All they knew about the Silver Surfer heading in was just the basic broad strokes of Surfer's backstory, which are admittedly pretty dark and grim. So to find that this comic was so bright, colourful, light-hearted and optimistic was a nice surprise. The character of Dawn Greenwood makes a perfect companion for Norrin as well. Surfer is a literal living mirror, since he's covered in reflective chrome, so to pair him up with a human mirror, a twin, is so clever and neat. The Allreds art in this comic is also amazing. Ammo could easily pull out a dozen favourite panels. If Ammo was pressed to offer a bit of criticism, he felt issue 4 dragged just a tad, but it was mainly because of a lack of action to keep the reader engaged. Joshy here, I personally think that the issue didn't need action, but that's just me. Favourite cover. Ammo's favourite cover was the gorgeous monochrome variant cover for issue 1 by Francesco Francavilla. Ammo's favourite panel. There's so many to choose from, but this full-page spread from the all-new Marvel Point one-shot would make a great poster. Ammo's favourite character. Plop! How could you look into those eyes and not fall in love?
I would personally rate the Allred run 5 out of 5 Kirby Crackles. Next month, the September Comic Club will be hosted by Laughing Seal as we barrel towards the final handful of comic clubs for 2025, and we'll be reading the 2022 Poison Ivy by G. Willow Wilson, issues 1 through 6, collected in the trade paperback The Virtuous Cycle. At next month's Comic Club, I will also be taking a few minutes to discuss what the 2026 Comic Club will look like, as there will be a few changes. That said, this is your chance to be putting comic suggestions into the 2026 Write-In Comic Suggestions for Comic Club thread in the Comic Club channel of the Discord. If you enjoyed reading The Silver Surfer by Dan Slott and the Allreds, I'll just recommend the full 29 issue collaboration. At the time, they would have liked to have done 1 or 2 more issues in the lead up to the end, but the team covered all the giant stories they wanted to tell. While Slott would return to do another Spider-Man story or another Thing story, and he would team up with the Allreds to work on another character for a 30-issue run, both Slott and Mike and Laura Allred are satisfied with the completeness of their Silver Surfer run. I will also advise this is the rare, serious case where there is a definite benefit to collecting the physical copy over the digital, as there is an issue 11, with a story told in the shape of a Mobius strip that requires turning the book in all directions, something the digital copy loses the creative grandeur of. What comics has Joshy been reading besides the Comic Club books in the month of August? DC's New Gods 2025, written by Ram V and Egan Cagle. The book is based on the characters created by Jack Kirby. Take note of the name Jack Kirby. Not only is he a pivotal name in the formation of the Marvel and DC Comics universes, he's a name that you would have heard multiple times throughout tonight. The New Gods are natives of the twin planets of New Genesis and Apocalypse. New Genesis is an idyllic planet filled with unspoiled nature and ruled by the benevolent Highfather, while Apocalypse is a nightmarish polluted dystopia filled with machinery and fire pits, ruled by the tyrannical Darkseid. The two planets were once part of the same world, but split apart millennia ago after the death of the old gods during Ragnarok. As part of a diplomatic move, Highfather and Darkseid agree to swap and raise one of each other's children, Highfather raising Darkseid's son Orion, and Darkseid getting one of his acolytes to raise Highfather's son scot-free. Eventually, Scott escaped and fled to Earth, learning how to become the greatest escape artist in the world, becoming Mr. Miracle. Scott meets Big Barda, one of Darkseid's greatest warriors, and the two fall in love. After many years and many adventures, the married couple are one of the most shining examples of sustained love in the DC universe, and in this New God series, they're settling into being new parents to a daughter, Olivia. Meanwhile, the Highfather has not been himself and has tasked Orion with killing a different newborn New God baby boy set to awaken on Earth. Because of Darkseid's blood running through Orion's veins, Orion is unable to not follow Highfather's commands, but Orion can give the newborn a fighting chance, so goes to Mr. Miracle and tells him that Scott can take the child before Orion can find the baby and run. Scott initially refuses to abandon his wife and newborn daughter, but Orion knows Mr. Miracle won't be able to live with himself if a innocent is hurt on his watch, and Scott hates Orion because he's right. Scott leaves Barda and their daughter a letter explaining that if he didn't do this, he wouldn't be the man Big Barda fell in love with. Big Barda catches him leaving and immediately knows that Orion has talked to him into doing something stupid, like thinking he needed to leave his warrior wife and child behind. So the family head off together to save this child together, though Barda doesn't let her husband off scot-free. He's on diaper duty forever. There's also a bunch of high-concept space stuff going down, but I'm keeping this to the succinct explanation. I also read Europe Comics produced Elsbeth, Volume 1 by Tristan Roulette and Sarah Conradson. A long time ago, the curse of silence struck all the males of the magical kingdom, depriving them of their voices and the ability to use magic, and in many ways, they're karma beings, but also treated like second-class citizens. But Elsbeth, a young sorcery student, will stop at nothing to give her boyfriend, Jaheen, his voice back so that she can finally hear him say 3 simple words, "I love you." Most magic in that world requires a verbal component, but her boyfriend in the B or C storyline finds a loophole around that, teaches some of the other young men, and then giving them power leads the others to start plotting a coup to take down the female sorcerers that control their world. It's a fascinating take so far, but I don't know if reversing gender dynamics to show how messed up sexism is works in the same way as when Mallory Blackman inverted race in her Noughts and Crosses book series to show how messed up racism is. The Elsbeth book is trying to tackle a few things at once, exploring gender differences, class differences, and magic users versus non-magic users. I'm not sure all of it exactly works, but I am curious to see where a second volume goes, to see how those explorations continue. I've also read the 2024 Gotham City Sirens series, and I reasonably enjoyed it. I've read single issues of Gail Simone's Uncanny X-Men and Alyssa Wong's Psylocke, still enjoying those, as well as really enjoying the Jonathan Hickman Ultimate Spider-Man series, which I'm still devastated is ending with issue 24. I read the Angel Lawn one-shot comic that retires the Lawn character in honor of the late, great actor Andy Hallett. And I read a little bit of Justice League Unlimited, Dan Mora's artwork, excellent as always. Read another chapter of the John Kent DC Go comic about John Kent undertaking an internship. Very fun. Read a little bit more of the Croaking webcomic. And I also read some more Storm. Absolutely love the series. Can't wait for the Thunder War to finish so that way I can read all of the Thunder War in a single go. I read some Absolute Green Lantern. Very interesting dark take on the Green Lantern franchise, with a very dark villainous take on Abin Sur, who in the main continuity was the one that gifted Hal Jordan with his original ring. I have been on an absolute reading binge with Dan Slott's Fantastic Four. I've still got a couple of volumes left, but have thoroughly enjoyed all of the adventures that I've been reading in the last month. And I've also, because of Comic Pop, been reading the Jed MacKay Moon Knight run, and am definitely going to be trying to read more of that over the course of the next month or two. And finally, I read the first issue of Fantastic Four Fanfare, not at all remotely associated with Dan Slott's run in any way, shape, or form, but it does have various other creatives attached as an all-star team, including Mark Waid, Alan Davis, and Sarah Pacelli, among others. And each issue will be visiting other iconic creatives, basically getting to revisit the Fantastic Four world and universe. In non-comic book reading, I've devoured the first two audio dramas of Dark Gallifrey, Missy, Parts 1 and 2. Very gloriously done, especially hearing Michelle Gomez opposite the Sylvester McCoy 7th Doctor, where she actually says some barbed comments that make a lot of sense, even from a non-villainous perspective, about the flaws of the Doctor, which was a real winning one-uppage. I also read the queer horror novel, The Haunting Between Us, in audiobook form by Paul Michael Winters, and really adored it by the end. Loved the queer romance more than the horror aspect personally, but yeah, it helped get the blood flowing, that's for sure. Yeah, I will say it's almost young adult coded, although it's definitely got at least a little bit of spice to it. So gauge for the appropriateness for younger audiences as you wish. I've started listening to the Discworld first Discworld novel by Terry Pratchett, The Color of Magic. I've listened to it with different narrators in the past, but in the last couple of years, re-recordings have come out, and so the first book is that I'm listening to currently is narrated by Colin Morgan, who's narrating all of the Wizards books, which is quite apt given he once played Merlin in the Merlin TV shows, unassociated with the Terry Pratchett books, though. And I've also been reading slowly Marco Shiro's Into the Light, because Marco Shiro collaborated with Rick Riordan to write the Percy Jackson spin-off The Sun and the Star, which has a sequel, I believe The Court of the Dead, that comes out later this year, and I wanted to check out if the aspect of the book that I was really digging was Marco Shiro's or Rick Riordan's contributions, and I'm still equally enjoying Marco Shiro's work. I've enjoyed to a lesser extent, I think, Rick Riordan's solo work, but yeah, I think jury is still out at this stage. And this brings us to the end of tonight's Comic Club. To quote this book, "The universe is infinite and ever expanding. One day you'll find somebody who is your time and your space, and they'll be your universe."